A stray cat leads police to an alley. What will the police unfold in the alley? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The city always seemed quieter at night, the bustling chaos of the day giving way to an eerie stillness. In the heart of its labyrinthine alleys, where the glow of streetlights barely reached and the air carried the faint scent of damp concrete, the stray cat moved silently. Its sleek gray fur blended with the shadows, and its eyes, sharp and golden, caught the faintest glimmer of light. It paused, sitting on its haunches in the middle of a narrow alley, staring intently down its length as though waiting for something or someone. Officer James Harding and his rookie partner, Maria Lopez, were on their nightly patrol. James, a seasoned veteran with more than 2 decades on the force, walked with a casual confidence born of years in the field. Maria, on the other hand, was still finding her footing, her steps a little quicker, her eyes scanning every shadow. This part of the city was known for its trouble, petty crimes, forgotten corners where the downtrodden gathered, and occasionally, things that defied explanation. "You get used to the quiet," James said, his voice low as they turned into another darkened alley. "It's not the noise you have to worry about. It's when everything goes silent." Maria nodded, gripping her flashlight tightly. "Doesn't mean I like it," she muttered, her voice betraying her unease. That was when they saw it, the cat. It was sitting perfectly still, its gaze fixed on them with an intensity that made Maria stop in her tracks. "You see that?" she asked, nudging James. He followed her gaze and smirked. "It's just a cat," he said, brushing past her, probably waiting for scraps. But as they continued walking, the cat didn't move. Its golden eyes followed their every step, unblinking. Then, just as they reached the edge of the alley, it stood, its tail flicking, and began to walk ahead of them. Maria frowned. "That's weird. It's like it's leading us somewhere." James chuckled. "Don't tell me you're scared of a cat." "I'm not scared," Maria shot back. "It's just, animals don't usually act like this, do they?" Before James could respond, the cat stopped and turned to look at them, letting out a sharp, insistent meow. Maria froze, her unease growing. "See? It's doing it again. Like it wants us to follow." James sighed, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "All right," he said, adjusting his belt. "Let's see where this little guy is going. But if it leads us to nothing, you're buying the coffee." The cat's meows grew louder as it turned and began weaving through the alley, pausing every few steps to glance back at the officers. Maria followed closely, her flashlight cutting through the dim light, while James trailed behind, shaking his head but unable to suppress a growing sense of intrigue. The deeper they went, the more the air seemed to change. The alley grew narrower, the walls pressing in on either side, and the faint sounds of the city faded into a heavy silence. Shadows danced across the uneven pavement as Maria's flashlight flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of graffiti-covered walls and discarded trash. "James, this place doesn't feel right," Maria said, her voice low. "Are you sure we should be following it?" James stopped, his brow furrowing as he took in their surroundings. "It's just an alley," he said, though there was a note of hesitation in his voice. "Besides, we've come this far. Might as well see what's at the end." The cat stopped abruptly in front of a stack of old cardboard boxes. Its tail swished back and forth as it let out another meow, this one softer, almost plaintive. Maria hesitated, her flashlight trained on the boxes. "What's it doing?" she whispered. James stepped forward, squinting in the dim light. "Probably found a mouse or something," he muttered. But as he drew closer, he noticed the way the cat was acting. It wasn't pouncing or pawing at the boxes. Instead, it sat beside them, its gaze fixed on something just out of sight. Maria joined him, her flashlight steady now as she shone it over the pile. That's when they heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A whimper. Both officers froze, exchanging a quick glance. "Did you hear that?" Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, his hand moving instinctively to his radio. "It's coming from behind the boxes," he said, his tone suddenly serious. He reached out and began carefully moving the boxes aside, his movements deliberate. Maria held the flashlight steady, her heart pounding in her chest. As the last box was moved, the beam of light fell on something neither of them could have expected, a small bundle wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. The whimpering grew louder, and Maria gasped as she realized what they were looking at. "It's a baby," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Oh my God, James, it's a baby." James crouched down, his hand shaking slightly as he reached for the bundle. He pulled it closer, gently peeling back the edges of the blanket to reveal the tiny face of a newborn. The baby's eyes were closed, its cheeks pale, and its tiny fists clenched tightly. It let out a weak cry, its fragile body shivering in the cold night air. "Radio for an ambulance," James said, his voice firm as he cradled the baby in his arms. "We need to get this little one to a hospital now." Maria fumbled with her radio, her hands trembling as she relayed the situation to dispatch. "We found an infant," she said, her voice shaking. "It's alive, but it's cold and weak. We need medical assistance immediately." As the dispatch operator confirmed the ambulance was on its way, Maria turned her attention back to James and the baby. The cat, which had been sitting quietly beside them, stood and rubbed its head against James's leg before stepping closer to the baby. It let out a soft meow, almost as though it were trying to comfort the tiny, shivering bundle. James glanced at the cat, his expression a mix of disbelief and admiration. "You brought us here," he said softly. "You knew." Maria knelt beside him, her eyes welling with tears as she looked at the baby. "How could someone leave a baby here?" she asked, her voice filled with anguish. "It's so cold, so dangerous. What if we hadn't found it?" James shook his head, his jaw tightening. "We didn't find it," he said. "The cat did." The sound of sirens broke the heavy silence, their wailing growing louder as the ambulance approached. Maria stood and waved it down, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Paramedics rushed into the alley, their movements efficient as they assessed the baby's condition and carefully transferred it to a warm, insulated carrier. As the ambulance pulled away, its lights flashing red and blue against the brick walls, Maria and James stood in stunned silence. The cat, now sitting calmly in the spot where the baby had been found, looked up at them with its piercing golden eyes. "What are the odds?" Maria murmured, her voice still trembling. "What are the odds that we'd follow a stray cat into this alley at this exact moment?" James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched down, reaching out to scratch the cat behind its ears. "Some things don't need odds," he said finally. "Sometimes the universe has a way of making sure we're in the right place at the right time." The cat purred softly, leaning into his touch. For a moment, the weight of the discovery seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of gratitude for the baby's survival, for their presence, and for the inexplicable guidance of the stray that had led them there. The alley seemed quieter now, the urgency of the moment replaced by a lingering stillness. James and Maria stood near the spot where the baby had been found, their breaths visible in the cool night air. The cat, having settled back into its usual posture, stared at them as if waiting for the next move. Maria broke the silence, her voice soft but still trembling with emotion. "James, how do you think the baby ended up here? This alley. It's not somewhere someone would just pass through." James shook his head, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know," he admitted. "But it wasn't random. Someone left the baby here, and they must have known this cat was around. It's like they trusted it to lead someone to the baby." Maria turned her gaze to the cat, her expression filled with a mix of awe and disbelief. "But it's just a stray," she said. "How could anyone count on a cat to do something like that?" James crouched down, resting his arms on his knees as he studied the animal. "Maybe it's more than just a stray," he said quietly. "Animals have instincts we don't understand. And this one," he trailed off, shaking his head. "This one knew exactly what to do." Maria crossed her arms, her mind racing. "We need to find out more," she said, her tone firm. "About the baby, about how it got here. And maybe," she hesitated, glancing at the cat, "maybe the cat can help us figure it out." James raised an eyebrow. "You want to interrogate a cat?" Maria shot him a look. "I'm serious. Think about it, it was here for a reason. If we follow it, maybe it'll lead us to more answers." James sighed, rising to his feet. "All right," he said, "but if this turns into a wild goose chase, you owe me more than just coffee." The cat, as if sensing their intentions, stood and began walking further down the alley. James and Maria exchanged a glance before following, their footsteps echoing softly against the brick walls. The alley grew darker as they moved, the faint glow of streetlights giving way to shadows. The cat moved with purpose, pausing occasionally to look back and ensure they were still following. After several minutes, the alley opened up into a small, forgotten courtyard. The space was cluttered with discarded furniture, broken bottles, and piles of old cardboard. In the center stood a weathered wooden bench, its surface covered in graffiti and scratches. The cat hopped onto the bench and sat, its tail curling neatly around its paws. "What now?" Maria asked, her voice low. James stepped closer, his eyes scanning the area. There's something about this place, he said, his tone thoughtful. It feels significant. Maria frowned, her flashlight sweeping over the courtyard. Significant how? James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed to a small pile of belongings tucked beneath the bench, an old backpack, a worn-out jacket, and a pair of scuffed sneakers. Look, he said. Someone's been staying here. Maria knelt down, examining the items. The backpack was faded and torn, its zippers barely functional. Inside, she found a crumpled piece of paper with what appeared to be a handwritten note. The words were smudged, but she could make out a name, Elena. Elena, she said aloud, holding up the note. Do you think that's the mother? James nodded slowly. Could be. It's a start, at least. We need to get this to the station, run it through the database. Maria carefully folded the note and placed it in her pocket. As she stood, she noticed the cat watching her intently, its golden eyes glinting in the dim light. Do you think it's been staying here too? She asked, gesturing to the cat. James shrugged. Wouldn't surprise me. If this was her spot, and she took care of the cat, it makes sense it would stick around. Animals don't forget kindness. Maria sighed, her mind racing with questions. But why leave the baby here? Why not take it to a hospital or somewhere safe? James placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. Sometimes people are desperate, he said quietly. They make choices we can't understand because they don't see another way. The weight of his words settled over them as they stood in the courtyard, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the city. The cat, still perched on the bench, let out a soft meow, drawing their attention. Maybe it's not about understanding, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe it's about doing what we can to make things right. The next day, Maria and James returned to the station with the items they had found. The note with the name Elena became their starting point. They ran it through their database, hoping to find a match. After several hours, a record popped up. An Elena Torres, a young woman with no fixed address who had been reported missing by a local shelter a few weeks earlier. She's only 19, Maria said, reading through the report. She was staying at the shelter for a few months, but left suddenly. No one's seen her since. James leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing. And now there's a baby, he said. It lines up. They reached out to the shelter, hoping to learn more about Elena. The staff remembered her well, a quiet, kind-hearted girl who had struggled to find her footing after leaving an unstable home. She had bonded with a stray cat that often lingered near the shelter, feeding it scraps and sitting with it on the steps. That has to be our cat, Maria said, her excitement growing. It's been following her all this time. The shelter director sighed. Elena was always looking out for others, even when she had nothing herself. If she left the baby in that alley, it wasn't because she didn't care. She must have thought it was the only way to keep it safe. The pieces of the story began to fall into place, but questions still lingered. Where was Elena now? And why had she chosen that alley, of all places, to leave the baby? As Maria and James prepared to head back to the alley, the cat's behavior continued to weigh on their minds. It's like it knows more than we do, Maria said as they drove. Like it's been trying to tell us something this whole time. James glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. You're starting to sound like one of those animal psychics, he teased. Maria rolled her eyes. Call it whatever you want. But that cat led us to the baby. And now it's led us to Elena's story. There's something there, James. I can feel it. When they arrived at the alley, the cat was waiting for them. It sat near the bench, its tail flicking lazily as though it had been expecting their return. Maria crouched down, holding out a hand. You've been looking out for her, haven't you? She murmured. The cat meowed softly, leaning forward to sniff her fingers. James crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. If Elena's out there, this cat might be the key to finding her. The air in the alley felt heavier than usual, as if it carried the weight of unanswered questions. Maria stood, brushing the dirt from her knees as the cat watched her closely. Its golden eyes seemed to flicker with an unspoken urgency, and for a fleeting moment, Maria felt as though it was trying to tell her something. She glanced over at James, who was scanning the area for any signs they might have missed. This cat isn't just wandering, Maria said, breaking the silence. It's like it's waiting for something, or someone. James sighed, his arms crossed. You're really leaning into this theory of yours, huh? Maria didn't respond immediately. Instead, she crouched down again, her gaze level with the cat's. "Where is she?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The cat's ears twitched, and it let out a low, almost mournful meow before standing and beginning to walk away. Maria stood quickly, her heart racing. "James, it's moving again," she said. "Come on." James groaned but followed, his footsteps echoing against the walls of the narrow alley. "If this cat leads us to a dead end, you're buying dinner." Maria didn't reply. Her focus was entirely on the cat, which moved with a kind of deliberate grace, weaving through the alleys as though it knew every twist and turn. They passed boarded-up windows and graffiti-covered walls, the faint hum of the city growing quieter with each step. Finally, the cat stopped in front of an old, dilapidated building. Its brick facade was crumbling, and the windows were covered with grime. A faded sign above the door read Haven Shelter. Maria's breath caught in her throat. "This is where she stayed," she said, her voice trembling. "The shelter director mentioned it." James frowned, stepping closer to the building. "You think she came back here?" Maria shrugged, her eyes scanning the area. "Maybe. Or maybe there's something here that can tell us where she went." They pushed open the door, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of mildew lingered. The space was empty, abandoned except for a few broken chairs and scattered papers. The cat slipped inside, its movements silent as it padded toward a corner of the room. Maria and James followed, their flashlights cutting through the dim light. In the corner, they found a small nest of blankets and clothing, arranged as though someone had been sleeping there recently. Maria knelt down, her flashlight illuminating the makeshift bed. "She was here," she said softly. "Not long ago." James crouched beside her, his gaze falling on a small notebook half buried beneath the blankets. He picked it up carefully, flipping through the pages. The handwriting was messy but legible, the words scrawled in hurried lines. "I don't know if I can do this. The baby deserves better. I just want her to be safe." James's jaw tightened as he read the words aloud. Maria's heart sank, the weight of Elena's struggle pressing down on her. "She was scared," Maria said. "She thought she was doing the right thing." James nodded, his expression grim. "But she's still out there. And she's alone." The cat let out a sharp meow, drawing their attention. It was sitting by a door at the back of the room, its tail flicking impatiently. Maria stood, her flashlight trained on the door. "You think she went through there?" she asked. James shrugged. "There's only one way to find out." The door led to a narrow staircase that spiraled downward, the air growing colder with each step. Maria's heart pounded as they descended, the faint sound of dripping water echoing in the distance. When they reached the bottom, they found themselves in a small basement, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. In the corner of the room sat a young woman, her knees pulled to her chest, and her face buried in her arms. She didn't react to their presence, even as the cat trotted over and rubbed against her leg. "Elena," Maria said gently, taking a step forward. The woman looked up slowly, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She blinked, her gaze shifting from Maria to James and then to the cat, which was now purring softly at her feet. "How did you find me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Maria crouched down, her tone calm and reassuring. "The cat led us," she said simply. "It hasn't stopped looking out for you." Elena's lips trembled and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't know what else to do," she said, her voice breaking. "I couldn't take care of her. I thought if I left her somewhere safe, someone would find her and give her a better life." Maria placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, her touch gentle. "You did what you thought was best," she said. "But you don't have to do this alone. We can help you." James stepped forward, his voice firm but kind. "The baby is safe," he said. "She's at the hospital, and she's going to be okay. But we need to make sure you're okay, too." Elena nodded slowly, her hands trembling as she wiped her eyes. "I never wanted to leave her," she said. I didn't think I had a choice." Maria exchanged a glance with James before turning back to Elena. "You do have a choice," she said, "and we're here to help you make it." Back at the station, Maria and James worked tirelessly to connect Elena with the resources she needed. They coordinated with social workers, counselors, and the shelter to ensure she had a safe place to stay and the support necessary to rebuild her life. Elena was hesitant at first, her guilt and fear making it difficult for her to trust. But with time and the unwavering presence of the cat, she began to open up. The baby, whom Elena named Lily, was placed in foster care temporarily while Elena worked to regain stability. Maria visited her often, bringing updates and photos of Lily, whose health had improved significantly since being found. Each visit brought a little more light back into Elena's eyes, a little more hope that she could one day be the mother Lily deserved. The cat, which Elena affectionately called Shadow, never left her side. It became a constant source of comfort, its quiet presence reminding her that even in her darkest moments, she was never truly alone. Months passed, and the story of Elena, Lily, and Shadow began to ripple through the community. What had started as a small, almost coincidental event, a stray cat leading two officers to an alley, had turned into something much larger. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing Shadow the guardian cat, and local reporters were eager to share the tale of how the feline's instincts and loyalty had helped save a life. For Elena, however, the attention was both overwhelming and bittersweet. She had spent weeks rebuilding her sense of self, working with counselors and leaning on the support provided by the shelter. Every day was a challenge, but it was also a step closer to healing. And through it all, Shadow remained her steadfast companion. Elena would often sit by the window of the shelter, staring out at the city as Shadow curled up beside her. The cat's quiet purring filled the room, a soothing reminder of the bond they shared. "I don't know where I'd be without you," she said one evening, scratching behind Shadow's ears. The cat blinked slowly, its gaze warm and steady, as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." Meanwhile, Maria and James continued to check in on Elena and Lily. Their visits weren't just part of their duty, they had grown invested in the young mother's journey. On one such visit, Maria arrived at the shelter with a small photo album in hand. "I thought you might like this," Maria said, handing the album to Elena. Inside were pictures of Lily, taken by the foster family. In each photo, the baby's bright eyes and chubby cheeks radiated happiness. Elena's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time, they weren't tears of despair. "She's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Thank you for this." Maria smiled, sitting beside her. "She's a fighter," she said, "just like you." As Elena's confidence grew, she began to take steps toward regaining custody of Lily. She attended parenting classes, worked with social workers to create a stable plan, and even started a part-time job at a local cafe. The shelter staff marveled at her determination, noting how Shadow always seemed to be by her side, as if cheering her on. One evening, Elena sat down with James and Maria to discuss her progress. "Do you think she'll remember me?" Elena asked, her voice tinged with both hope and fear. "Do you think she'll forgive me?" Maria reached out, placing a reassuring hand on Elena's. "Babies are resilient," she said, "and love doesn't go away just because time has passed. She's going to know how much you care." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've done everything you can to turn things around," he said, "and that says a lot about the kind of mother you're going to be." The day finally came when Elena was reunited with Lily. The foster family, who had cared for the baby as their own, met Elena at a local park, handing Lily back into her arms. Tears streamed down Elena's face as she held her daughter, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and joy. "Hi, sweetheart," Elena whispered, cradling Lily close. "It's me. Mommy's here." Shadow sat at Elena's feet, watching the reunion with quiet dignity. The cat's tail flicked lazily, and for a moment, it seemed to smile. Maria and James stood nearby, their hearts full as they witnessed the scene. "I'll never doubt a cat's instincts again," James said, his tone light but sincere. Maria chuckled, nudging him playfully. "Told you, there was more to Shadow than meets the eye." Life began to settle into a new rhythm for Elena and Lily. They moved into a small apartment provided through the shelter's assistance program, and Elena continued to work at the cafe, saving money and building a future for her and her daughter. Shadow, of course, became an integral part of their little family. Every evening, after putting Lily to bed, Elena would sit on the couch with Shadow curled up beside her. She often thought about how far they had come, from the cold, dark alley where she had left Lily, to the warmth and safety of their new home. One night, as she stroked Shadow's fur, Elena whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me. For leading them to Lily. You saved both of us." Shadow purred softly, its golden eyes closing in contentment. It didn't need words to convey its response. Its presence was enough. The story of Shadow and the alley continued to inspire people long after Elena and Lily had found their new beginning. A local artist created a mural in the alley where the baby had been found, depicting Shadow sitting proudly beside a bundle wrapped in a blanket. Beneath the mural were the words, "Sometimes heroes have pause." The mural became a symbol of hope for the community, a reminder that even in the darkest corners, love and loyalty could shine through. People would visit the alley to leave flowers, notes, and even toys for Shadow, though the cat no longer roamed the streets. Elena often brought Lily to see the mural, holding her daughter's tiny hand as they stood before it. "That's where our story began," she would tell her, her voice filled with gratitude. "And that's where we learned that love can come from the most unexpected places." As Lily grew, she became just as fond of Shadow as Elena was. The cat remained by their side, constant reminder of the bond that had saved their lives. And though the years brought changes and challenges, one thing never wavered: the connection they shared, forged in an alley and strengthened by love. And so, the stray cat who had once been overlooked became a beacon of hope, a guardian in the truest sense. Its story, and the story of the mother and child it had helped save, continued to inspire all who heard it, proving that even the smallest actions could create ripples that changed lives. Shadow had found a purpose that night in the alley, and it had fulfilled that purpose with a quiet, unshakable determination. And for Elena and Lily, Shadow would always be more than a pet. It would be family. The story of Shadow, Elena, and Lily continued to ripple across the city like a pebble dropped in a still pond. What had begun as a single moment of instinct, a stray cat leading officers to an alley, became a tale that united people across boundaries of age, background, and circumstance. Elena's journey, in particular, captivated the hearts of many. The young mother who had been lost and afraid was now a beacon of resilience, her courage and love for her child shining through the darkness she had endured. Shadow, the once overlooked alley cat, had become a local celebrity. It was no longer just a stray. People began to refer to Shadow as the hero cat or the alley guardian. Journalists arrived at Elena's apartment, hoping to catch a glimpse of the cat that had saved a life. Elena, though overwhelmed by the attention, took the opportunity to share her story, not for fame, but to shed light on the struggles faced by young mothers like her. One afternoon, a local news station visited Elena's apartment for an interview. Elena sat on the couch with Lily on her lap and Shadow curled up beside her. The interviewer asked her to recount the events leading up to the discovery of Lily. "It was the hardest decision I've ever made," Elena said, her voice trembling. "But I wasn't abandoning her. I was trying to save her." And Shadow made sure she was found. "I don't know how, but this cat was watching over her and over me in ways I didn't even realize." The interviewer smiled, glancing at Shadow. "What do you think made Shadow stay by your side?" Elena hesitated, stroking the cat's fur. "I think Shadow knew I needed help, even when I didn't know how to ask for it. Animals have a way of understanding us, even when we don't understand ourselves." Inspired by Elena's story, the neighborhood began organizing events to support other struggling families. Local shelters received a surge in donations, clothes, baby supplies, and funds to help mothers and children in need. The mural of Shadow in the alley became a gathering place for community members, a symbol of hope and resilience. One day, Maria and James joined Elena and Lily at the mural for a small ceremony. Maria had brought a plaque to place beneath the mural, engraved with the words, "In honor of Shadow and the love that never gave up." As the plaque was unveiled, Maria spoke to the small crowd that had gathered. "This story isn't just about a cat or an alley," she said. "It's about what we can accomplish when we look out for one another." Shadow's loyalty reminds us that even the smallest actions can have the biggest impact. The crowd clapped, many wiping away tears as they looked at the mural. Elena held Lily close, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered to Maria and James, "for everything." As time went on, Elena began to find her own sense of purpose. She started volunteering at the very shelter that had once taken her in, sharing her story with other young women who were struggling to find their way. "It's okay to be scared," she would tell them. "It's okay to feel lost, but you don't have to go through it alone. There's always someone or something willing to help." Her words resonated deeply with those who heard them. The shelter director noted how Elena's presence brought a renewed sense of hope to the residents. "She's living proof that things can get better," the director said. And Shadow, well, Shadow's the perfect reminder that help can come from the most unexpected places. Shadow became a regular visitor at the shelter, often curling up beside the women as they shared their stories with Elena. Its quiet, steady presence seemed to bring comfort to everyone it met. Though Shadow had found a home with Elena and Lily, it still maintained a sense of independence. It would often wander the neighborhood, returning to the alley where it had found Lily. Maria and James occasionally spotted the cat during their patrols, its sleek figure weaving through the streets with a kind of quiet purpose. "I think it's checking on its territory," Maria joked one evening as they watched Shadow from a distance, "making sure everything's in order." James nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "It's more than that," he said. "That cat's got a mission, and it's not done yet." One night, during one of Shadow's wanderings, it stumbled upon another person in need. A teenage boy sat slumped against a wall, his head in his hands. Shadow approached him cautiously, its golden eyes scanning him with curiosity. The boy looked up, startled, but the sight of the cat seemed to calm him. "Hey, where do you come from?" the boy murmured, reaching out a tentative hand. Shadow rubbed against him, its purring filling the silence. The boy, who had been on the verge of making a dangerous decision, felt a sudden wave of comfort and clarity. Shadow's presence gave him the strength to stand and seek help. Later, when Maria and James learned of the encounter, they marveled at how Shadow's instincts continued to guide it toward those in need. Elena's story, along with Shadow's incredible role in saving Lily, inspired a local author to write a children's book titled Shadow's Alley. The book depicted Shadow as a brave and loyal hero who watched over the city, helping those in need. It became a bestseller, with proceeds donated to shelters and animal rescue organizations. Elena and Lily were invited to a book signing event, where they met countless families who had been touched by their story. Children lined up to meet Shadow, who sat patiently on a cushion, its tail flicking lazily as it accepted gentle pets and admiration. One little girl, clutching a copy of the book, looked up at Elena with wide eyes. "Is Shadow really a hero?" she asked. Elena smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Yes," she said. "Shadow is the bravest hero I've ever known." Years passed, but the impact of that fateful night in the alley never faded. Lily grew up hearing stories about Shadow and the extraordinary way it had brought her and Elena together. The mural in the alley remained a cherished landmark, a symbol of resilience and hope for the community. Elena continued to advocate for young mothers, speaking at events and working tirelessly to ensure that no one felt as lost and alone as she once had. Shadow, now older and slower, still accompanied her on her visits to the shelter, its presence a source of comfort and inspiration. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Elena sat on the porch of her apartment with Lily and Shadow by her side. Lily, now a bright and curious 5-year-old, rested her head against Elena's shoulder. "Mommy," she said softly, "do you think Shadow knew what it was doing that night?" Elena smiled, running a hand through her daughter's hair. "I think Shadow knew exactly what it was doing," she said, "and I think it's been watching over us ever since." Shadow purred, its golden eyes glinting in the fading light. For a moment, the world seemed to pause, and Elena felt a deep sense of peace. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with courage, love, and the quiet, unshakable bond that had brought them to where they were now. Shadow's fame, once confined to the local neighborhood, began to spread across the city and beyond. Social media posts, news articles, and even short documentaries shared the story of the stray cat who had saved a baby and helped the mother find her way back to her child. People from all walks of life found themselves drawn to the story, each seeing a piece of their own struggles and triumphs in Elena's journey and Shadow's quiet heroism. At the center of it all, Elena remained humble. She continued to focus on rebuilding her life, but she couldn't ignore the opportunities her story created to inspire others. Invitations poured in from schools, community centers, and advocacy groups, asking her to share her experience. At first, Elena hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to stand in front of an audience and recount the hardest moments of her life. But with encouragement from Maria, James, and the shelter staff, she decided to take the leap. Her first speaking event was at a local high school. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and parents, all eager to hear her story. Shadow, now a beloved symbol of hope, sat calmly on stage beside her, drawing smiles and soft whispers from the crowd. Elena took a deep breath before stepping up to the microphone. "When I first walked into that alley," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I didn't think I had anything left to give. I felt like the world had given up on me, and I was ready to give up on myself. But then there was Shadow." She paused, glancing at the cat, whose golden eyes seemed to reflect her own emotions. "Shadow didn't just save my baby. Shadow saved me. And in the process, this little cat showed me that even in the darkest moments, there's always a reason to keep going. The audience erupted into applause, many wiping tears from their eyes. After the event, students lined up to meet Elena and Shadow, sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. One young girl, clutching a notebook filled with drawings of cats, told Elena, "You've shown me that it's okay to ask for help." And that's something I'll never forget. As Elena's story continued to spread, it inspired a wave of change in the community. Local businesses began organizing fundraisers for shelters, offering job training programs for at-risk youth, and creating safe spaces for struggling families. The alley where Shadow had found Lily was transformed into a small community garden, complete with benches, flowers, and a plaque that read, "Where love and loyalty changed everything." Maria and James became unofficial ambassadors for the story, often speaking at events and sharing their perspectives as the officers who had been there that night. This wasn't just about a baby or a cat, James told an audience at a local fundraiser. It was about what happens when we stop and pay attention to the world around us. Shadow saw something we might have missed. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Maria nodded, adding, "It's easy to think of a stray cat as just another part of the background." But Shadow wasn't just a cat. Shadow was a hero. And heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Elena, Lily, and Shadow often visited the garden that had replaced the once dark alley. For Elena, it was a place of reflection, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had overcome. For Lily, now a curious and playful child, it was a place of discovery. One sunny afternoon, as Lily ran among the flowers, she stopped abruptly and called out, "Mommy, look, it's a butterfly." She pointed excitedly to a bright orange butterfly perched on a flower, its wings fluttering gently. Elena smiled, walking over to join her. Shadow followed, its tail flicking lazily as it sat beside them. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Elena said, kneeling beside her daughter. Lily nodded, her eyes wide with wonder. "Do you think it's like Shadow, watching over us?" Elena's heart swelled as she glanced at the cat, whose golden eyes seemed to reflect a quiet understanding. "I think so," she said softly, "and I think it's a reminder that we're never really alone." As the years went by, Shadow's once sleek coat began to gray, and its movements grew slower, but its spirit remained as strong as ever. Shadow continued to accompany Elena and Lily on their walks, its presence a comforting constant in their lives. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a sky in shades of orange and pink, Shadow wandered into the garden alone. It found its way to the plaque that bore its story, settling down beside it as the cool breeze ruffled its fur. For a moment, it sat perfectly still, its gaze fixed on the horizon. When Elena and Lily found Shadow later that evening, the cat was lying peacefully beneath the plaque, its body still, but its expression serene. Tears filled Elena's eyes as she knelt beside her beloved companion, her hand trembling as she stroked its fur. "Thank you," she whispered through her tears, "for everything." Lily, now old enough to understand the depth of their loss, wrapped her arms around her mother. "Shadow's still watching over us," she said softly, "just in a different way." Shadow's passing marked the end of an era, but its legacy continued to inspire. The mural in the garden was updated to include a depiction of Shadow resting beneath the plaque, its golden eyes forever watching over the place where love had triumphed over despair. Elena, now a well-known advocate for young mothers and at-risk families, established a foundation in Shadow's honor. The Shadow's Light Foundation provided resources, support, and hope to those in need, ensuring that no one would feel as lost and alone as she once had. Lily, inspired by her mother and Shadow's story, grew up to become a writer. Her first book, Guardian of the Alley, became a bestseller, touching hearts around the world. In the dedication she wrote, "For Shadow, who taught us the meaning of love, loyalty, and hope." And so, the story of the stray cat who saved a baby and changed countless lives became a beacon for generations to come. It was a reminder that even in the darkest alleys, light can be found, and sometimes it takes the quiet courage of a stray to show us the way.